All right, welcome. My name's John Buck. I know it's been quite a long time since I've posted anything on this channel. Okay, so just to give a quick little heads up, I do have a video that's actually coming soon-ish. I say that, but like I've been working on it for like the last year. So just to give, I hear my myself. It's a video on epistemology. I wanted to go through sort of like 8 sort of primary or 9 actually arguments that is generally used for ultimate skepticism. And I wanted to respond to each of those arguments, but do so in a Steel Manning sort of way. So I've been working on that for a while, sort of off and on, and I'm very lazy, but I am now like working on the slide. So I will get to that. But today, I know just out of the blue, I decided to do a live stream because I was listening to Dr. Jim Madden and Patrick Flynn talking about the simulation argument on the YouTube channel Philosophy for the People, and I had some thoughts about it. It's freezing. Okay. I did do a debate like 3 years back on the simulation argument just to show that it was like plausible to think that we're living in a simulation. I'm not really as like interested in that sort of topic anymore, but I do still find that people will sort of dismiss the idea sort of out of hand with, I think, to be bad arguments. So I noticed a few of those taking place in this video, and I wanted to do my best to try to correct what I see to be bad arguments being put forward on my side. So I will be responding to the video. It'll be a pretty quick live stream. I'm just going to be sort of skipping around a little bit, but let's get into it.
So for people who aren't familiar, maybe I'll lay out
lay it out, man.
One of the versions I'm most familiar with. As with anything, right? This thing has seen sort of multiple permutations. But there was a really influential article by a guy, Nick Bostrom. When was that, Jim? Was that like early 2000s or something?
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, the general sketch of the argument or the proposal is simply like, hey, look, there's kind of 3 ways or 3 possibilities, if I remember the details right, of how things could go. One possibility is we just never get the technology to generate conscious beings with computers. Possibility number 2 is we do get that technology, but for some reason we don't use it. Maybe we just decide it's unethical and we just like ban it outright. Nobody does it. Third possibility is we do use it and we use it a lot, maybe even an infinite number of times. Okay. Well, if that is a possibility, maybe that's already happened. And maybe there's actually an infinite number of simulations out there. It could just be simulations all the way down, pretty much, for all we know. And in that case, just throw a dart, right? Throw a dart and ask yourself, what are the chances that I'm either in sort of base reality, the real world, as it were, or any one of those, possibly infinite number of computer simulations. And of course, the idea of this thought experiment is supposed to kind of like get you to worry a little bit, right? Well, It just seems like very probably that dart would hit the computer simulation rather than the real world. So that was the one I had in mind of jamming on. I'm not sure if you've.
So yeah, I think that's a decent characterization of Nick Bostrom's sort of argument that he lays out in his 2001 paper or so. I haven't read it in a while, and it's not really relevant because, as far as I can tell, the arguments put forward in this aren't directly targeting any of those 3 sort of possibilities that Bostrom sort of lays out. But that's fine. They have a whole different sort of argument against the simulation hypothesis. So we'll get into that.
Heard any different iterations of it, Jim? Or
I haven't. This is not one I've thought a whole lot about, right? Mm-hmm. I'm always fascinated by the notion, though, like, if we are living in a simulation, it would somehow have to be a part of the simulation that we became aware of it as a simulation. And I don't know if that's a self-referential problem, but it'd be interesting. Like, so whoever's running the simulation has like gamed it such that we would like become aware of our status in the simulation, which then means we have 1 foot out of the simulation. We're getting something right independently of the simulation.
That's meta.
Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But you see what I'm saying is it's like, if indeed we're in a simulation and we know it, then we're not really in a simulation because we're getting something right. We're somehow stepping outside of the simulation and getting the fact that we're in a simulation dead ass right.
Yeah.
my microphone was muted. My bad. Okay, I'm not exactly sure what his argument is supposed to be getting at here. It could be that like what he's like his idea of what the simulation hypothesis is that all of our beliefs, all of our experiences are false. And so this would be like if it is the case that we come to this true belief about, we're living within a simulation, that's a true belief, which means that the simulation hypothesis must be false. But I don't like think that that's like a necessary entailment of the simulation hypothesis. Like I think you could be somebody that thinks that we're living within a simulated reality and still think we have some true beliefs, like the true belief that 2 + 2 = 4, or the true belief that it is wrong to murder a child for fun, or something like that. Like these are sort of necessarily true beliefs, or at least morally true beliefs. But so like if that's kind of like what he's getting at, is that like the simulation hypothesis is sort of like committing you to the position that all of our beliefs are going to be false. I just don't think that's like a requirement. Now maybe he's wanting to say that, okay, the simulation hypothesis is that like all we have is basically knowledge or access to things within the simulation. And so if we have knowledge or access of something outside that simulation, then we're sort of like getting beyond the simulation. And so we're, I don't know, I guess not simulated in that respect. And I don't know. For me, how I understand knowledge is that like some sort of causal connection between the truth of the matter and your belief in it, and you having justification for believing in that. So like it seems plausible to think that, okay, somebody that's living in a simulated world, like I'm coding away in some little sim, he somehow is able to like form beliefs, but he formed the belief that he is living within a simulated reality because, hey, I just programmed it into his head that he's living in a simulation. Then there would actually be a causal connection between the truth of the matter, him being in a simulated reality, because I programmed it into him, and that belief corresponding with reality, so that being true. And now the question will be like, okay, is this little sim sort of justified in holding to this belief about living within the simulated reality? And like there's a variety of ways in which you could sort of like provide that sort of justification necessary. If you want to lean more internalist, just so long as the little simulated guy had the experience or the phenomena, the intuition that he was living within a simulated reality, then without absent some sort of defeater, he would be justified in accepting that intuition that he has. If you want to take a sort of externalist approach of like proper functionalism, sort of like Alvin Plantinga, where like if you have adequate or properly functioning faculties for arriving at true beliefs, then similarly, if I'm the programmer, I could program into him so that he does have these properly functioning faculties when I program into him, hey, you're living in the simulation. And now that's a case of special revelation. Like most people that defend the simulation hypothesis aren't suggesting that the programmers are like digitally divinely revealing to us that we're living within a simulation. But that would just be like one avenue. If for some reason let's go further into his argument, because I think I'll respond to it a little bit more in a second.
This is why I wanted to talk about this with you, because I knew your answer would be totally different than Gavin's and and Tyler's.
So it just seems to me now it could be like it's like just epistemic luck that we were aware that we're in a simulation, right? You know what I mean? It's not like a grounded truth, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's not epistemic luck that we became, like, if we think we can give an account of our being in a simulation, then it would seem like then we're not, right? Because we do have some grip on something outside of the.
Now, I do want to agree with him here that, like, if it's just sort of lucky that we happen to form a true belief, then I think that Gettier cases will apply, and so we won't actually have knowledge. I think there's a case in which you could sort of maybe argue that we have abductive reason for believing that we live in a simulation. I'm not saying that like right now, like instead of saying we have knowledge that we're living within a simulation, Nick Bostrom or other people might say that, yeah, we don't have this sort of like necessary and sufficient means for knowledge, but we do have maybe highly plausible account of reality. And that account of reality it suggests that we're living within a simulated world. But if anyway, I'll go on.
Simulation, right?
Yeah.
Right. Now, but I think there is a huge self-reference problem with the whole simulation thing, because our very if indeed our world is structured by some like our computer simulation that's seemingly arbitrary to what reality is, right? Well, then our very like reasoning processes are in fact part of the simulation. So there's no reason to think that our reasoning processes get anything right beyond the simulation. But the claim that we're in the simulation is a claim beyond
Of
the
reason.
simulation.
Yeah, it's a claim
And
of reason. Yeah.
it's a claim. It's a claim to get things right beyond the simulation. Like,
Okay, so I think like getting a better understanding of his argument here is saying that like if we are simulated beings, then our cognitive faculties will only be functioning or designed towards giving us true beliefs about the simulated world, and we have no reason to think that our cognitive faculties will reliably sort of attach onto the real world if it's outside of our simulated world. Like our cognitive faculties were only designed within this particular domain, and so we have no reason to expect that the faculties will apply or be useful outside of that domain. Oh, and just to answer your question, Emerson, let's see. I just came in. John, do you think we live in a simulation? No, I don't. Like, I did do a debate like 3 years ago defending the position, and even in that, I wasn't like defending that we actually are, just that we have a plausible reason to think so, given like non-locality and quantum mechanics or something like that. It's been a while since I've like listen to that debate again, and so I'm not sure how much I'd like agree with the sort of form of argumentation I was putting forward back then. But I just find that like I think people tend to dismiss the idea way too offhand, and so I think it's like well worth considering and defending and like giving a strong case both for and against. So yeah, that's why I'm interested in doing this video. But going back to Jim Madden's point, I think that, yeah, if you're sort of more inclined towards an externalist understanding of knowledge or warrant and justification, then I can see how this sort of like line of argumentation might work, where you say that you can only know things insofar as your cognitive faculties were designed for helping you to arrive at those sorts of true beliefs. But insofar as they were not designed towards helping you in doing that, then you cannot know that. Like that's the sort of Plantinga's approach, and sort of providing that warrant that is had that makes justified true belief into knowledge. And I think that's like a defensible sort of approach to take regarding our cognitive faculties. I myself lean more sort of on the internalist camp with like Michael Huemer and company, and thinking that like all that's really required. Well, I'm okay. So I am an externalist in regards to like there needs to be some sort of causal connection between the truth of the matter and your forming of the belief of it being the case. That's in order to have knowledge. But I think you can have like a reasonable abductive inference, even if you don't actually have knowledge, given I don't know other means like you recognize that it's highly implausible that this is the case, even though there's no causal connection between it actually being the case and your forming of the belief there. Anyway, in regards though to the Plantingian sort of externalist approach regarding epistemology. Okay, yeah. Okay, so Jim Madden is, full disclosure, I'm a crazy extreme externalist. Okay, yeah. So let's assume externalism is true, where in order to have a true belief, you must have some sort of faculty that was designed at helping you to arrive at this true belief. And not like saying there must be some sort of like intelligent designer for all of our faculties. I'm sure a lot of naturalists will say that, yeah, some sort of proper functionalism is true regarding our justification, but evolution has sort of like designed, square quotes, designed our faculties to help us arrive at true beliefs regarding our reality. And I think that in the similar way that we might want to say that our cognitive faculties were not designed in helping us to form true beliefs about, let's say, COVID. Like it's not like if evolution is true, or even if theism is true, or things like that. I don't think that like God would have been like, okay, we got to make sure that they have the true, they have the faculties that are specific to COVID. I think faculties are sort of more malleable, I guess, or broad, in the sense that, like, if you have a faculty that's helps you to arrive at true beliefs in this one domain, it will also apply and be effective in this other domain, insofar as there's some sort of commonality between the two. And so there still can be an argument to be placed that, like, okay, any cognitive faculty that helps us to arrive at beliefs regarding the simulation is only going to be relevant to the domain of the simulation. And so we have no reason to believe that they will actually apply outside of that simulation. Now, I think that there could be a few ways, like, even if I do buy that sort of line of argumentation, let's just say, I guess, hypothetically speaking, that the only reason that a simulator would decide to create some sort of simulation if it was somehow relevant to them. And it seems like if a simulator is interested in designing simulations that are relevant to it, then there's going to be some sort of commonality between the objects within the simulation and the simulator outside the simulation. So here's a hypothetical example, or like hypothetical reason why a simulator might decide to create a world of simulated beings. Let's suppose that we live in a sort of post-scarcity society where you can basically design anything that you want at the touch of a button, and that can, like, with no expense or cost or anything like that. Now, let's suppose that not everyone within this society is a perfectly moral being. Like, there's this possibility that people will do things that are detrimental to the broader society. And given the fact that, like, we've technologically developed to the point that at the touch of a button, you can basically mass produce some sort of, let's say, a biological weapon of some sort. Like, if I just say, Alexa, design for me some sort of biological weapon that can kill off half the population. And there's some sort of highly developed AI that knows how to do that and goes about doing that. And then at the drop of a button, okay, I have this mega virus that will specifically target particular people or something like that. Now, to just sort of set this off in a highly populated area, that would be a major concern. And if it's the case that within this society where there is this high degree of technological development, this is going to be a major risk for the people within that society to make sure that, okay, we can't allow just anybody to have this sort of technology. But if it's the case that it's super easy to make this sort of technology, and, like, there's no way in which to sort of quarantine it or anything like that, there's going to be this desire, I guess, by the people within that society to ensure that the people within that society that has access to this sort of technology is fully moral in how they go about using this technology. And so there needs to be a sort of reason for testing, I guess, the moral character of the people outside of a situation in which they can, like, develop, in which they can, like, set off some, like, 10 times a nuclear warhead or something like that. Whatever it is that's, like, a technologically dangerous development. And so, like, that would be a reason, I think, that's somewhat plausible. I'm just sort of, like, throwing it out there as a possibility for why some sort of highly technologically developed society might be interested in making simulations, especially simulations that are common enough to their own, in which it can sort of test the moral fortitude of the people put in a variety of different situations. Okay, so that's, like, an option. And I think that would be an instance where the faculties that are designed within the simulation would actually apply to things outside the simulation. And maybe it's the case that our cognitive faculties are just going to be sort of a starting ground. And then once you have them, you can just sort of use them in a variety of ways. And to the point, like I'm a theist. I think that, like, you can look at contingent things and get a better understanding of, like, okay, this contingent thing requires some sort of cause outside of itself. And so from that, I can infer that there must be some sort of non-contingent thing. Similar to that, like, if we look at things and for some reason think that, like, they're not going, like, this wouldn't be exactly arriving at a simulation argument, but I'm just saying that like there's a sort of inference that can be done even when our primary faculties are only designed for things within a particular domain, in order for us to sort of like arrive at beliefs about things outside that domain without like needing some new faculty. And then there's a sort of I guess it wouldn't be exactly an infinite regress where you need a faculty to design that faculty or anything like that. I just think that cognitive faculties are not going to be particularly domain specific. All right, Jim Madden was responding. I was thinking of the simulation in terms of something like Kant's transcendental idealism. There's always the sneaking suspicion that his claim for transcendental idealism entails a perspective outside of it. Okay. Sneaking suspicion. Yeah, I can kind of, I definitely do kind of see that, where like there's almost this neglect to remark about it itself. Like if it was the case that Kant sort of got it right, that like all of our beliefs are going to be sort of like tainted with these synthetic categories that are sort of overwhelming all of our resources and how we're supposed to arrive at true beliefs. It seems like that belief is also going to be like tainted by these synthetic categories. And so like, why should we think that that belief about how all of our beliefs are tainted by synthetic categories is actually justifiably held? That is interesting. This presupposes access to the noumenal realm, his transcendental idealism denied. Yeah. So maybe we're sort of like having a different idea of like what we mean by simulationism. Like how I understand the sort of simulation argument as laid forward by Nick Bostrom or in popular culture, like with the Matrix or something like that, is to think that all of your phenomenal experiences are sort of just digital representations of something that is outside our direct experience. Okay, Jim's got to run, but I really want to talk about this. This is something I want to work on. Yeah. Like I'd definitely be interested in talking with you guys. I recently had a whole kick on epistemology, and so like it's been fun sort of like applying that and like seeing how some of the arguments against various highly skeptical scenarios, in my opinion, just sort of go without serious consideration. But yeah, thanks for dropping by. Hopefully we can talk about this at some point later. All right, so I will carry on with the video because there's a few other points that I want to go through. Emerson Green, have you seen Chalmers' interview with Goff and Frankish? Is there a way actually? Yeah, that's better. It's a nice little update on the simulation stuff that's a little bit more philosophically defensible. I actually do like. I don't think I've seen this interview, but I have like read some of Chalmers' paper on the simulation argument, and I do sort of like his approach that all of our sort of common sense beliefs will still be true and applicable. Yeah, no worries, Jim. All right, so yeah, let's carry on with the video. Oh, I can't hear anything. Let me see if I can fix it.
That we're in the simulation cannot be a product of the simulation, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And now if our processes of reason are just simply the arbitrary selections of the simulation, well, then they can't be trusted to say anything outside of the simulation. So it would then be inaccessible to us that we're in it.
Yeah. Right.
So the whole thing, I think, becomes self-referentially incoherent.
Yeah.
Right. So just to make sure, his point is that if we're simulated beings, then the cognitive faculties that we have, that we were designed to have, I guess, are only going to be applicable to within our specific domain in which it was designed for. And so we have no reason to suspect that they would be applicable to things outside of that domain. And I guess I have two sort of points that, like, one, if we would think that we were simulated, we would think that the reason that we were simulated would probably be relevant to the outside world. And so our cognitive faculties within the simulation would probably also map onto the outside world. Like if we were to imagine, like, let's suppose the reason that people simulate beings is just so that they get a better understanding of like human social dynamics or something like that. And then the cognitive faculties that we were designed for in the simulated world regarding human social dynamics would also apply outside in the real world, because there's a reason that the people had in the real world were simulating the people inside the simulation, some sort of commonality between the two. And so we can suspect that our intuitions or our faculties within the simulation could also still map onto the outside world. But went over that all right.
I think it has a deeply self-defeating character to it on multiple levels. One is that it does seem to me that this is structurally parallel to pretty much any globally skeptical scenario, right?
Yeah.
So to the extent that you think Descartes' demon or brain in a vat type of scenarios really are self-defeating, why? Because they call into question all cognitive reliability, including reason. But we need reason to get philosophical arguments off the ground, including for a simulation hypothesis.
Yep.
But now we have no reason to trust reason. We have no reason to take any of these arguments seriously. It's sort of that universal acid that immediately neutralizes itself, right?
And, I don't know if that's generally I get that this is a point he's making about general skeptical scenarios. I'm not going to be responding directly to that, because I think in the upcoming video that I'll be going through, I will be sort of like handling that sort of consideration regarding overall like Cartesian demon or brain in a vat, those sorts of scenarios. I don't think that this sort of dismissal gets at the sort of root of the argument.
And do you get my argument that if we are aware that we're in the simulation, then we're not in it?
I know. You're saying something different. Yeah, you're saying something different.
And I think there's two claims, and I'm saying them both. Is if we're aware of it, then we are outside of it. So then we're not really just in a simulation, right?
So I get that, like, from his comments in this live stream, which has been helpful, like getting a better understanding of like what he's sort of meaning when he's talking about simulationism, is more responding to the sort of Cartesian, or to the sort of Kantian argument about how like all of our experiences are sort of mediated by sense categories, and so like we can't ever actually connect to the noumenal realm because our own faculties are in the way of it. And yeah, I do think that's an interesting point, that like you are going to have this sort of problem of like, if you say that we cannot have access to the noumenal realm, that's sort of like a comment about the noumenal realm, in that like it cannot be accessed by us. And now maybe that's like an extrinsic property of the noumenal realm, and so maybe you're not like actually arriving at a true belief about the noumenal realm, you're just arriving at a true belief about us. But yeah, I think it's an interesting argument, but I don't think it's really responding to the simulation argument as understood within pop culture regarding like, what if you were a brain in a vat, or what if you were in the Matrix? So
yeah.
Also, though, if we think we can come to the conclusion somehow, like some grounded conclusion that we're in the simulation, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that becomes self-referentially problematic, because our very reasoning would itself just be part of the simulation, and there's no reason to think it'll apply outside of the simulation, but we're claiming it does, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think so those are my two. I think those are two arguments we can kind of make at a first order level why the hypothesis doesn't work. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I think, and this is kind of my general take on all. What I mean, I agree with you. I think it's a way to answer Descartes' demon, right? Is like, look, if the demon could trick me about 2 + 2 = 4, right? Then couldn't the demon be tricking me about whether or not I can rule out that I'm in a dream right now?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Do you see what I mean? It's like it's a universal acid. As soon as you say it can rule out all these things, well, it rules out everything, including the plausibility of the demon hypothesis.
Right.
I do like this sort of like response to the Cartesian argument, that like, if it's possible that I'm living within that a demon is sort of deceiving me about all things, maybe it's also possible that my belief that this sort of thing is possible was a deception by, I guess, another Cartesian demon, or maybe something else. And so maybe that's where it sort of unravels a bit, like in this, are we sort of supposing that there is still a Cartesian demon that's sort of like giving us this delusion of grandeur, or this delusion to think that, oh, what if I'm being deceived by a evil demon? But it seems like if there really is an evil demon that's sort of like deceiving me, how's it a deception? Because it's actually true that I'm being deceived to think that there's a possibility that a demon is deceiving me. So like, it's not really a deception if it's telling me something that's actually true, but it is a sort of like interesting approach. I'll have to think about it more.
It's what is Wittgenstein's line is the moment you tried to doubt everything, you wouldn't get so far as doubting anything.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Because like the very notion that I can like decide what is dubious and what is not, the evil demon hypothesis, if I could like the evil demon could have programmed me to be wrong about that too.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Uh-huh.
Okay. So it seems to me as soon as you go that route, you just quit making sense. You're just
all you can do is wiggle your finger. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. You're just babbling now. And that's exactly Wittgenstein's take on it, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, but even leaving that aside,
Mm.
I just wonder whether it's, the evil demon hypothesis of simulation. I just don't think they're cognitively significant claims, right? Like the reality where we're in the simulation and we're not in the simulation, there is no discernible difference. Right. And so like it's like it's not falsifiable. Right?
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's admitted by people I've seen write on this, right? There's no way you would be able to sort of empirically distinguish, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you deny like the a priori argument against it, like what we've been making, right? Okay,
Yeah.
about its self-referential incoherence. Okay, fine. So then you're saying it's not like an a priori claim. Okay. It's just then it's basically a synthetic empirical claim, but it's not falsifiable then, right? So it's not really a cognitively significant empirical claim either, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
So either it's incoherent or it's cognitively insignificant is my view on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's where like I'm utterly confused, because like, did AJ Ayer come back from the dead and like disagree with his future self again? Like, are we suggesting that in order for a claim to be cognitively meaningful, it must be able to be falsifiable? And if like, that's just the verificationist principle, which has been sort of like dismissed by all of philosophy for like 70 years now or so. And it's primarily because like this verificationist principle that like, in order for something to be cognitively meaningful, it must be able to be like sense experience or confirmed through sense experience in principle. But like in principle, what sense experience could confirm this verificationist principle? Like that's the whole like downfall of verificationism. Now, like just to read him charitably, of course, like I can't imagine that he's like agreeing with AJ Ayer's sort of like epistemology here. So I'm like trying to understand, like, by cognitively significant, is he meaning like something that's like practically significant to us because we are human beings that are interested in reality as it's practical to us? Like, if like his point is that like if there's no empirical difference between a simulated world and the real world, then there's not going to be much of a difference to us. It's not going to change the way that we live our lives. But it's weird because like Pat Flynn later in the episode says that like if he found out that the whole of reality could just be shut off by the whims of some sort of hormonal alien teenager that is running us as a simulation, that would cause him to change his him the way that he lived his life, because everything is utterly meaningless. And so like it does seem like there is apparently to some people a practical difference between living in a simulated reality and living in a non-simulated reality, even though there's not going to be any empirical difference between the two. And I also find this sort of like criticism of the simulationist hypothesis to be sort of confusing, because like if he's suggesting that just because something is not practically significant or cognitively significant, that it's not worth caring about, that seems like utterly in disagreement to what he later says at 30, 33, just 30, 30, I believe, right here.
As well.
Well, because a lot of times when we're asked, like, what's the value of truth? Like, people are looking for a pragmatic. Yeah. But here's the thing is like, that begs the question against a whole tradition that's saying, no, I mean, like go to book 1 of Aristotle's Metaphysics. And he says, you know, what does the divine wisdom get you? It gets you nothing but the divine wisdom, period. Right. It gets you nothing. It is of no use. Right.
Yeah. So like, there's not going to be a practical difference between knowing something at a metaphysical level versus just knowing it as like insofar as it's useful to yourself. Like metaphysics isn't like a practical field of science at all. It's like the good of metaphysics is to know things as they are, to contemplate things as they really are. And so like if it really is the case that we live in a simulated reality, and it makes no like practical difference to how we live our lives at all, there's going to be some sort of good in recognizing that fact about our reality, insofar as it is a fact. Okay, so yeah, that was another point where I just find his maybe I'm not getting what he's like putting forward here, putting forward earlier, because it seems like his later point here just utterly goes against that. But okay, I have just like 2 more minutes left in this video, because he does go into how it's possible that we live in a sort of social simulation where our beliefs or our values are sort of being hijacked by companies or social institutions or things like that to make us desire and work and believe in certain things. And I think that's like an interesting point, but I don't think it's like exactly relevant to the simulation argument as typically understood. So let's go. Right, there we go.
Of course, there's more we can say, and maybe we'll touch lightly upon it. But I mean, the whole simulation hypothesis also is sort of resting on assumptions that you and I'm sure, both challenge, if not outright reject: a physicalism, a functionalism, a computational theory of mind.
And just to like remark on that, there's a whole sort of like field of simulationism, like understood by like from the movie The Matrix, in which does not rely upon any sort of functionalist, computationalist, or physicalist theory of mind, but is rather just insofar as you are an organic being that can have dreams and have a sort of like visual experiences that do not correspond with the actual world. Those sort of visual experiences can be hijacked through some sort of digital means, to the point that you cannot discern between a dream and reality, or between whatever the jacked in aspect of you and reality actually is. Like that's a whole sort of area within simulation hypotheses that is still open even to the substance dualist or the idealist, I suppose. Anyone that accepts that there's a possibility in which even as an immaterial being you can have like experiences that do not correspond with reality, that could theoretically be hijacked digitally. And I think that like anyone who accepts that like they have dreams that are sometimes where we have sense experiences that do not correspond with reality, I think that should at least make it an open possibility. Now regarding Bostrom's sort of like 3 possibilities argument, you could still have disagreements with other areas there, but like either some sort of post-civilization society would not be interested in developing simulated realities, or they would not be capable of creating these sorts of realities. And then if you think both of those are pretty plausible, then that just leaves you with the third option, that of all the possible worlds in which you seem to be living in the real world, you're more likely living within a simulated one.
I'm committed to throwing all of those out into
yeah, but one physicalist in the simulation.
Yes, right.
I mean, it's like everything's got a footnote now. You're not really you're just saying like we're in a program where physicalism makes sense.
Yeah,
but if you but you can't step outside the program
and know that physicalism is the case, right? Yeah, so like you just can't get around that self.
You can't use the physicalism inside the simulation to step outside the simulation and say that there's a simulation.
Yeah,
you can't do it.
Right? Yeah, it's all legitimate. Yeah,
as if Kant never picked up a pen, right? I mean, you know,
right. You darn fools. Yeah,
the Philistines.
I think it was the Oxford guy who wrote this original paper, if I remember right.
I'm not going to act surprised.
Yeah. Now the so there's all those issues too. But I really I like the turn that you took with this. That we don't have to be radically skeptical to grant that there's something in this stream of thought that's actually really worth paying
Yeah.
attention to and
Yeah.
and taking seriously on some level. And the one other thing, before we get to questions, is toward the end of my episode on Catholic Answers, the host Cy, he actually we were responding to actually Neil deGrasse Tyson. So they like to, keep it pop culture, which is cool. And deGrasse Tyson, trots this out, the simulation hypothesis on Larry King. He says, I actually find this really hard to argue against. And I was sort of responding to that. But then at the end, Larry King says, well, what difference does it make? And Tyson says, it doesn't really make any difference.
Yeah.
And that to me seemed the most preposterous part.
Yeah, because he
of
just
it
said
all,
it's
dude.
not cognitively significant.
Either that, or I actually thought of you when Cy mentioned that aspect, because to me that's just a practical nihilism at that point.
Yep.
This man is just living life as a nihilist. I think that a world.
Okay, so that's interesting. Like, whether or not we live in a simulated world does make a sort of practical difference to the individual. And so, like, if we're sort of assuming, it seems like if there's a practical difference between these two scenarios, then it is cognitively significant, at least to the person within that scenario. So I'm not exactly sure what Jim Madden is meaning exactly by cognitive significance. Like I said, I think if he's meaning like it's not cognitively meaningful, then that's just a sort of asserting the verificationist principle that I doubt that he would be sort of falling back in line with. But I don't know, maybe I'm doubting it. Like I'm a fan of him and of Pat as well, and so like I'm responding to this in love. Hopefully that's coming across. But I do like this. This will be the last sort of comment, just sort of finishing up their point here and then responding to that before I'll be heading off.
Worldview consequence like that is not significant. Tells me that you're just a nihilist, right? At that point, like you really are. How could that not be significant? Mm-hmm.
Yep, I agree. Yeah. Man. I agree.
Especially since he thinks that that his simulation could be run by some like hormonally unstable teenager in his mom's basement. Like, if like I'm at the whims of that, I'm not sleeping anymore at night. Right?
Yeah, I know. Exactly. Yeah.
Right? I'm going to the nearest bridge. I'm trying to get out of the simulation as quickly as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess I can understand kind of like where he's getting at there, but I also find that like I don't know, these guys are a big fan of like ancient Greece and the sort of like Greco-Roman sort of understanding of the world. And so like if you're at least sympathetic towards that sort of worldview, it seems like the Greek tragedies do sort of like present this case where reality is sort of governed by the whims of all these sort of hormonal teenagers, I guess you could say. And yet there's still a nobility in living as best as you can. Like Sophocles' Oedipus cycle is excellent in that like Oedipus is somebody who's fated to do the very one thing that would be absolutely ignoble for anyone to live, to kill their own father and to have sex with their own mother. And in trying to avoid doing all of that, he's fated directly into doing it against his will, pretty much, or at least against his awareness of it even taking place. Like he ends up killing this guy that slighted him on the road, and so without realizing that it was his father, because he thought that he had just left his father. And so it's like it's a great story. And then Antigone as well, where Oedipus's daughter, she's takes up the noble battle. She takes up the noble sort of like act to bury her brother who died a shameful death in like treachery against the state, and she has this sort of like commitment to do what she believes to be right, even though she knows it's utterly going to go against her. And so like it seems like, I don't know, if you're sympathetic towards this sort of like ancient Greek pessimism that's there, where you can still have this you can live nobly even in a world that is like designed against you. I feel like, yeah, the simulation argument of like, okay, we live within a world in which it could be shut off at the moment's notice just because some future scientist just forgot to pay their electric bill or something like that. I still think that like there's a way in which one can live nobly even with that possibility in the back of your mind, I guess. But anyway, it's 45 minutes. Anyway, I was just listeing to this today and I was like, had some thoughts, so I wanted to put that out there for Pat and Jim and for anyone else to enjoy or to ponder on. But yes, I am making a video on epistemology that's probably going to be like 2.5 hours long, and I might divide it up into segments related to each particular argument, or maybe I'll do the whole thing. Hopefully, like I'm making the slides, so I should be hopefully coming out with it sooner. I'm trying to be more productive, so look forward to that. But good night all.